Today's chat is going to be about something which has fascinated people for hundreds of years. Some may look at this and think that it's devil's work or magic. Others swear that it's the best way to connect to their guides or to find their purpose in life. So for them, it's something completely spiritual. For others, it's a great therapeutic tool or creative way to tap into themselves and their inner knowing. And for some, it's just a fun way to pass the time. Tarot. So today's chat is just going to be about the most commonly asked questions that I get as a tarot reader. This happens often in my events, when I'm doing markets, or my personal readings that I do with my clients. So this is what I'm going to be covering today, and you can see below for timestamps. So feel free to skip ahead if you already know the answers. So the question I get asked most often is, what is tarot? To put it simply, tarot is a deck of 78 cards. And on these cards, you're going to see a pictorial language. So you'll see things like hope, agony, faith, courage, and community. And so basically, this deck is just a tool. And what a tool does has a lot to do with its user. So like I said in the intro, tarot could be a deeply spiritual thing. It can be something therapeutic. It can be artistic. For me, it's a combination of all three. It's a highly, I call it a spiritual art because there's a lot of interpretation that is happening here. I have a really strong emotional connection with my deck. And so with my readings that I do for myself or for other people, again, I can be tapping into the spiritual part or tapping into the therapeutic part or even the artistic part. Like if you're a writer, these are a great way for if you're like at a spot in your story and you're like, I don't know what I should do next, pull a card and let the images speak to you. To fully answer the question of what is tarot, we need to look a little bit about its history. Now, the history of playing cards goes back to the Tang Dynasty in China because printing had already been developed in China as early as the 8th century. So it was really easy for them to move from simply playing with coins or blocks to eventually pieces of paper. Through war and through trade, playing cards made their way to the heart of the Islamic world during the 13th century. And so this was the Mamluk Empire in Egypt. And this is where we get the four suits we have today: cups, swords, coins, and polo sticks. So you can see in the image here that on the left we have the 6 of coins, then the 10 of sticks, then the 3 of cups, and then the 7 of swords. And because the Mamluk Empire had such a huge influence, it was really easy for playing cards to then spread onto Italy and to Spain during the second half of the 14th century. In the 15th century in Italy, this is where we're going to see the trump cards. So the trump cards are the 22 cards, the major arcana, like the Fool and Death. So you can see in these cards how they really connect to the tarot cards we know today. For example, Temperance still has the 2 jugs of water, and Time looks a lot like the Hermit card that we have. But it wasn't until the 17th and 18th century that tarot moved from just a fun card game to be used for divination. So there were some books that were published around that time that really brought forth the rise of using tarot as something spiritual and magical, right? One of them was Jean-Baptiste Alit's book called How to Entertain Yourself with a Deck of Cards. This was basically one of the earliest guides to cartomancy, which is fortune telling with cards. And then also around that time, Antoine Court de Gibelin wrote a book called The Primitive World. And in this, he wrote about the origins of tarot and really made it into a mystical thing, which added this allure to the cards. And then, of course, in 1909, we're going to get the deck that we love and know today, the Smith-Waite Tarot deck by Arthur Edward Waite, and that was illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith. But if you want to dive more into this subject, I am going to link a few articles that are a great read about the history of playing cards and tarot. And then also I would recommend Beneva Wen's book, Holistic Tarot. She's got a great chapter in there that really dives more into the history, especially the part that it starts to get more esoteric. One thing that I find interesting that really varies depending on what country I'm in or what type of market that I'm at is this assumption that because I read tarot cards that I'm psychic. Now I will say there is an intuitive element to what I do where, sometimes when I'm looking at a certain card, when I'm doing a reading, a specific element is going to shout at me, right? Or stand out to me more that I will know in the moment has to do with the reading and the message that's kind of trying to come through. But it's by no means a psychic thing. It's more of like a feeling, intuitive thing. Just like when I'm talking to the person, right? And I'm trying to pull from them what question that they're looking for. That's also an intuitive thing because I've got to move through the waters of what's happening in order to pull the exact message. But no, you don't need to be psychic at all in order to read tarot. Although if you do have some psychic abilities or some intuitive abilities, by practicing tarot, you will get more in tune with them and just that ability to listen or to feel when something is coming through. Which this question I feel like leads into the next one, which is, can tarot predict the future? So when people first start learning tarot, they often use it in a very predictive way, myself included. Like they ask questions like, what will happen if I move to this city? Will the person I'm with be with me forever? What will happen if I quit my job? And it's not that tarot can't answer those questions, although sometimes it will give you the answer that you're not looking for. It can be tricky that way. But oftentimes the answer that you get isn't what you completely imagine. Like, for example, I remember I was sort of casually dating this person, situationship, very, I didn't know what was going on, right? And I asked, like, what is going to happen in this relationship? And I got the 10 of Cups. Now, at the time in my limited knowledge, I was like, rainbow, happy ending, together forever, right? And the thing is that person actually ghosted me and I never heard back from them. But I did get my 10 of Cups happy ending one. I developed a lot of self-love. I learned how to work through my different emotional states and weather the storm of joy and despair. And then also I eventually found a new relationship that I'm very happy in. And so I did get to have my love story, just not with that person, right? And so that's where sometimes the predictions of tarot are not exactly what you imagine them to be. Now, when it comes to determining when things will happen, some decks are easier to understand than others. As you can see in this deck, we have the full range of seasons. So we have cards that are set in the spring, summer, fall, and winter, which can help you with timing. But it's also important to note what elements you're seeing in your spread. So if you're seeing a lot of pentacles, that means something will develop slowly. It means that you need to put in a lot of hard work and use your resources to make that thing happen. If you see the wands, that is something where your passions can really take you and something can come up quickly, but it also can fade fast. As you can see in this card here, the 8 of Wands, we have the morning glory. And this is a flower that blooms very quickly in the morning and then dies out. And so it's just like your time is limited. You've got to strike while the iron's hot. If you see a lot of swords in the spread, that could be where, maybe the ideas are flowing, but they might not actually be put into motion. And same with the cups, which is the water element. That is going to be maybe where you're feeling something, but it's not necessarily what is actually happening. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing your spreads. From my experience and what I've seen in my readings with my clients are that the best tarot readings are less about predicting the future and more about connecting to yourself and finding ways to put the agency back in your hands. So how do you best prepare for a tarot reading? So with tarot, the more clear you are with your questions, the more clear your answers will be. And so some of the best ways to do this are simply to go for a walk, take a shower or a bath, meditate, maybe clean your space and set the energy, light a candle, right? So this can work if you do a reading for yourself or with a reader. Now with a reader, usually before the session starts, there's going to be some back and forth where the reader will help you hone in on those questions, but it's always best to come as mentally, energetically, and emotionally prepared as you can for the questions. So let's say that you're interested in learning tarot. One thing that I see floating around the internet is this idea that if you want to learn tarot, somebody else has to buy your first deck and give it to you. For me, this is completely false, although kind of a fun tale, but I bought my own deck and I am now a tarot reader. So the myth is definitely not true. So it can be kind of confusing to choose your first deck because there's such an array of wonderful decks out there, but the one that is kind of universally given as someone's first tarot deck or is recommended by many tarot readers, including myself, is either the Smith-Waite tarot deck or the Rider-Waite tarot deck. And so, for example, you can see here, this is the Rider tarot deck, and it's going to look like that, and that will be the one that is this size. And so for me personally, I don't care as much for this size because when I'm doing a spread, if it's like a large one, these ones just take up so much room. I also don't like as much the way that the lines are drawn and the colors. I personally like the feel of this one, which is the Centennial version. So you can search Rider-Waite Centennial version. I'll link it below. And the colors are a bit more muted, which gives a more vintagey feel. It also fits in my hand, which I have small hands, so this is nice. Just easier to carry and better to put down personally. But any version of this is fine. Just make sure that it is by US Games because there are different versions of this deck out there. Now, the reason why this is chosen universally is most of the other tarot decks are based off of this system. And so even if you get another deck, you're going to see similarities. And so once you learn how to read this deck, it is going to be easier to read the other ones unless they're based off the Thoth tarot deck, which also is an amazing deck. I just don't personally use it. Maybe in the future I will. What is so special about this deck is at the time that it was created, the minor arcana, which is the cards that you see before you, weren't typically illustrated. So Pamela Coleman Smith is the one who actually came up with this idea of illustrating these things. Like Arthur Waite gave her, the key words, but she ultimately decided the designs. So in the past, the Three of Cups would have simply been three cups with some sort of decorative motif. But now we have this rich image, and from it we can derive words like friendship, community, celebration, joy, harvest. If we look at this card, we might pull words like growth, patience, waiting period. Even from here, you can kind of maybe think of like the world is your oyster, right? Maybe adventure is awaiting. And then in this one, you can see the person actually going off on their own. So solitary time, travel, adventure again. With the moon, you can see how there's an emotional component with the water. So there's so much rich images that we can derive words from, which makes it really great for beginners. The other deck that I want to give an honorable mention to is my Ukeo deck because this is my favorite. I mean, I use this for myself more personally than I do the other deck. But you can see here that the minor arcana cards don't have people on them, but they're not as plain as some pip decks might be. So for example, the Nine of Cups has this image of a koi fish. And this relates to a story about a koi fish who's trying to reach the top of the waterfall in order to transform into a dragon. And so I just love the richness of the story. And so I think that, if you have a deck like this, and let's say there's, instead of people, you have other images, so you can be looking up like, what does a lotus flower mean? What is the symbolism behind that? Or, for example, like peonies or butterflies. And so there are so many little details that you can pick up on in decks like this, and then search and read, get a book from the library about flowers. And then you can see how those symbols really come to life once you've read about them. So there is some wiggle room. You don't have to get the Smith-Waite deck, but I will say having the Smith-Waite deck first helped me to understand this deck deeper. So what is the best way to start learning tarot? Now, the answer varies for many different types of people, but I think the easiest way is to get a deck that you connect to and either pull a card once a day or once a week, depending on your level of interest and just your emotional bandwidth. And so when you pull that card, you can ask a simple question like, what should I focus on this week? Or what is blocking me right now? Or for example, on the other side, it's like, what is the solution to the problem I'm facing? Now, when you pull that card, I would suggest not going to the guidebook right away. First, just look at the card, set a timer for 5 minutes, and notice all the details. Just take them in. You can even go into a trance-like meditative state if you like. Journal about it. You can write your guesses of what you think the card means, what the different symbols are. For example, like maybe you've been to a place where there's a garden like this in a mountain, and maybe it connects to a very specific memory from you. And so that memory is not going to be something that you're necessarily going to see in the guidebooks. I mean, I think the thing with tarot, just like with astrology, it's a very patient practice, right? It's not something that you're going to learn instantaneously. Now, after you sit with it and you write with it, I would suggest, for example, giving it some time. So maybe checking in back the next day to see, for example, did those things that you saw in the card happen throughout the day? Or was there some tie into the overall theme? And then looking in the guidebook, right? So all the guidebooks are going to be different, obviously depending on who wrote them, but there are some similarities to what each card means, and it is important for you to know them. But tarot overall is about connecting to your intuition and to yourself and that understanding. And so again, just taking it slowly day by day. I am going to be making another video about all the tips and tricks for beginners, so keep an eye out for that. What is the difference between the major and minor arcana? First, let's look how the deck is split. So the first 22 cards, which are the trump cards of the deck, represent the major arcana, and this is a story from the Fool to the World. Then the minor arcana consists of 56 cards. We have the court cards, and then we have 10 cards from ace to 10 of each suit. So the swords, which are air, the wands, which are fire, the pentacles, which are earth, and the cups that are water. Let's look a little closer. The major arcana is often referred to as the Fool's Journey, and the Fool's Journey is just about one's experience through life. And so this is going to be all the different stages of development, the major life events, and themes and lessons, right? So let me show you a little bit. For example, if we look at the High Priestess, this is a card about trusting in your own inner wisdom and connecting to your intuition. If we look at the Devil, this is about breaking the cycles of addiction and avoidance. If we look at Strength, we're seeing how to deal with animal impulses, how to deal with fear in a more gentle way. If we look at the Lovers, we're seeing, do we follow the path that has been set before us, or do we take a more risky route that's more adventurous? Another way that we can look at the major arcana is as archetypes. Archetypes are simply images or ideas that we hold in the collective mind. So, for example, let's see the Empress and the Emperor. So a very simple way to look at these cards is as the stand-in for mother and father. So what does this mean if the Empress is mother and the Emperor is father, does that mean that automatically when we're getting these cards, it's going to have to do something with our parents? Not necessarily, though that can sometimes happen. Let's distill this a little bit further. So if we were to boil down the Empress and the Emperor into just a key title, right, father and mother, we would be getting the nurturer and the protector. And so from those two words, we can ask ourselves a whole new host of questions, or we have a new avenue to explore. So with the Empress or the Nurturer, we would be asking ourselves questions like, how do I express love for others? Where did I learn it from? How can I treat myself with the same care that I do those I love? What creative gifts do I have that would benefit the community? How can I nourish them? And for the Emperor or the Protector, we would be asking questions like, are my boundaries being respected in this relationship environment? Who is the ultimate authority over my life? And what is my relationship to anger? So the minor arcana represents our day-to-day things, and this is separated into 4 realms. So first we have the watery realm of the cups. This realm is the world of our relationships, our emotions, our dreams, and spirituality. Then we move on to the earthy realm of the pentacles. And so this is everything in our material world. So the body that we inhabit, the food that we eat, the home that we live in, all of our resources. So, our income and everything that we put a value on. Then we move on to the airy world of the swords. And so this is our mind, how we process information, how we communicate. This has a lot to do with our anxieties and fears and conflicts as well. Then we move on to the fiery world of the wands. And so this is everything that heats us up, that excites us. So this could be our desires, our passions, our frustrations. This realm also has a lot to do with creativity and confidence, but also exhaustion and burnout. Lastly, we have the court cards, which can represent key parts of one's personality or a specific trait that is coming through in a moment. For example, someone might have the King of Wands energy. They're very confident, optimistic, know what they want, and are very creative in how they get it. Or they might have to play up this energy when they're going after a particular job. Like they've really got to fake it till they make it, even if maybe they don't have that experience, right? Or someone could have the Queen of Swords energy, be very critical and discerning and witty. Or maybe after a breakup, that Queen of Swords energy comes through because the emotions are too much to deal with. And they've got so many things on the table that they need to do that they have to push away their feelings and just get really practical and focused in the moment. But if you get stuck there, then maybe you become overly critical and overly dismissive of other things that might come in the way. Another way that I like to look at these cards is as spiritual guides or advisors. So, for example, sometimes when the Page of Cups shows up, it means that you need to connect to your inner child, be playful, be imaginative, be open. Perhaps when you see the Knight of Pentacles, this is cautioning you, telling you to make a plan first before you take any action. Really look at the resources that you have and find the best way to stretch them. So that is it for today's video. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message on bijoveastrology.com. You can find my info there. Just a reminder that I do tarot readings of all sorts from 30 minutes to an hour. I also do tarot tutoring, year-ahead readings for astrology, and so much more. So go ahead and check them out. And let me know in the comments below, what other questions about tarot would you like answered?